My name is Serafina Vale, and I'm 28 years old. Last Tuesday, I received legal papers that shattered everything I believed about family loyalty. My own parents were suing me for my $2 million beach villa in Malibu, the property I'd worked 16-hour days for 5 years to afford. Their lawyer's letter was crystal clear. The house should rightfully belong to your sister Melody, as the eldest child. But what they didn't know was that I'd already discovered the real reason behind their sudden interest in my success. Before we dive into this wild family betrayal story, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? If you're ready for a tale of shocking family secrets and ultimate justice, hit that like button and subscribe, because this story has more twists than a California mountain road. Trust me, you'll want to see how this unfolds. 3 weeks before those legal papers arrived, I was living what I thought was my dream life. I'd built my digital marketing empire from nothing, starting in my studio apartment with just a laptop and relentless determination. The Malibu villa represented everything I'd sacrificed for the sleepless nights, the missed social events, the relationships I'd put on hold while building my business. My parents, Robert and Catherine Vale, had always been proud but distant. They'd supported my ambitions with encouraging words, but never financial help, which I'd respected. They'd always claimed they needed to save everything for Melody's medical school expenses. Melody, my 31-year-old sister, had been the golden child since birth, valedictorian, prom queen, now a successful surgeon. While I was scrappy and entrepreneurial, she was polished and academic. The discovery happened during what should have been a celebration. I'd invited my family over to see the villa for the first time since I'd finished the renovations. The infinity pool overlooked the Pacific, the marble kitchen sparkled under recessed lighting, and every detail reflected years of careful planning and hard-earned money. Melody arrived with her husband James, both carrying themselves with that particular brand of entitlement that comes from old money and Ivy League degrees. My parents followed, and while Dad made appropriate impressed noises about the ocean view, I noticed Mom and Melody exchanging meaningful glances I couldn't quite interpret. During dinner, Melody excused herself to use the restroom. I followed a few minutes later to check on the wine selection in my kitchen and found her in my home office, photographing documents on my desk with her phone. She was so focused that she didn't notice me standing in the doorway. "Looking for something specific?" I asked, my voice carefully neutral. Melody jumped, her face flushing red. "Oh, I got lost looking for the bathroom. These big houses are so confusing." She laughed, but it sounded forced and brittle. I smiled politely and directed her to the guest bathroom, but something cold had settled in my stomach. After everyone left, I checked my office carefully. Nothing was missing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something important had happened. 2 days later, I received a call from my business attorney, Marcus Rodriguez, who'd helped me with the villa purchase. "Serafina, I need to ask you something confidential. Has anyone in your family been making inquiries about your property ownership or business assets?" My blood ran cold. "Why would you ask that?" "Because someone claiming to be conducting a family financial review called my office yesterday asking about the details of your Malibu purchase. They had enough personal information to sound legitimate, but something felt off. I told them I couldn't discuss client matters, but I wanted you to know." That evening, I hired a private investigator named Diana Walsh. I'd learned in business never to ignore red flags, and my instincts were screaming that something was very wrong. Diana was thorough and discreet, with 20 years of experience in corporate and family investigations. "I want you to look into my family's recent financial activities and communications," I told her during our first meeting. "Something's happening, and I need to understand what." Within a week, Diana had uncovered a web of deception that made my stomach turn. She'd obtained records showing that Melody had been researching property law, specifically focusing on unjust enrichment and family financial obligations in California. More damning were the email exchanges Diana had traced between Melody and a high-priced attorney specializing in family wealth disputes. But the real bombshell came when Diana presented me with financial records she'd legally obtained through her contacts. My parents had been lying about their finances for years. They weren't struggling to pay for Melody's education. They were millionaires, with investment accounts and properties I'd never known about. The family home I'd grown up in? They owned it outright, plus 2 rental properties and a substantial stock portfolio. Your parents have assets worth approximately $4.2 million, Diana explained, sliding documents across her desk. They've been hiding this wealth while letting you believe they needed financial help. I stared at the papers, feeling like I was seeing my entire childhood through a different lens. All those times I'd felt guilty for my success while thinking my parents were struggling. All the times I'd offered to help financially only to be told they were managing just fine and didn't want to burden me. There's more, Diana continued gently. I found evidence that your sister has been building a legal case against you for months. She's been documenting your assets, your business income, and consulting with lawyers about what she calls correcting a family imbalance. The worst part was the recorded phone conversation Diana had obtained through legal channels. Melody talking to her lawyer about me. Her voice was cold and calculating as she discussed strategy. Serafina always was the rebellious one. She's made all this money, but she's forgotten that family comes first. That house should be shared among family members, not hoarded by someone who got lucky in business. Lucky. After 5 years of 18-hour days, after sacrificing relationships and health and countless nights of sleep, she called it luck. But Diana saved the most devastating revelation for last. She slid a final document across the desk, a copy of a will my parents had updated 6 months earlier. In it, they'd left everything to Melody, with a specific clause stating that I had already received my inheritance through my business success, and therefore needed no additional support. They've been planning this for a while, Diana said quietly. The lawsuit is just the beginning. They want to establish legal precedent that your success creates an obligation to share with family members who they claim are less fortunate. Sitting in Diana's office, surrounded by evidence of my family's betrayal, I felt something shift inside me. The hurt was overwhelming, but beneath it was something harder and colder. They wanted to play legal games with my life's work? They wanted to teach me about family loyalty while lying about their own wealth? They were about to learn that they'd seriously underestimated their youngest daughter. I spent that night in my villa, looking out at the ocean and making plans. They thought they knew me, the compliant younger sister who'd always tried to please everyone. But they'd never seen the version of me that had built a multi-million-dollar business from nothing. They were about to meet her. The morning after Diana's revelations, I woke up different. The emotional devastation had crystallized into something much more dangerous, cold, calculated clarity. I made coffee in my marble kitchen, sat on my oceanfront terrace, and began planning my response with the same strategic mindset that had built my business empire. First, I called Marcus Rodriguez and scheduled an emergency meeting. I needed to understand exactly what legal ground my family thought they were standing on, and more importantly, I needed to prepare my defenses. They're claiming unjust enrichment and family financial obligation, Marcus explained after reviewing the preliminary legal documents Diana had obtained. Essentially, they're arguing that your success, while family members have lesser means, creates a moral and legal obligation to share your assets. It's a weak case legally, but expensive to defend, and they're banking on you settling rather than fighting. What if I told you my parents are actually millionaires who've been hiding their wealth? I asked, sliding Diana's financial reports across his desk. Marcus's eyebrows shot up as he reviewed the documents. This changes everything. If they've been misrepresenting their financial status while making claims about family need, that's fraud. We can not only defeat their lawsuit but potentially file criminal charges. But I had a better idea brewing. Something that would teach them about consequences in a way they'd never forget. My next call was to my business mentor, Victoria Chen, a brilliant entrepreneur who'd sold her tech company for $50 million at 40. Victoria had always been like an older sister to me, and she'd taught me that the best revenge in business wasn't emotional, it was strategic. Serafina, Victoria said after I'd explained the situation, you have an opportunity here to do more than just defend yourself. You can expose them completely while protecting yourself from any future attacks. What do you mean? Document everything. Build an airtight case. Then, instead of just defending, go on the offensive. Show the world exactly who your family really is. That afternoon, I implemented what I privately called Operation Transparency. I contacted 3 additional private investigators, including specialists in financial forensics and digital communications. If my family wanted to make my private life a legal matter, I'd make sure every detail of their deception came to light. I also reached out to my cousin Emma, my Aunt Patricia's daughter, who'd always been the black sheep of the family. Emma was an investigative journalist who'd been estranged from the family for years after exposing corruption in local government, work that my parents had loudly criticized as embarrassing to the family name. Serafina. Emma's voice was warm with surprise when I called. I haven't heard from you since Christmas 2 years ago. How are you? Emma, I need to ask you something confidential. What do you know about the family's finances? Specifically, my parents' wealth. There was a long pause. Are you finally seeing behind the curtain? I've been waiting years for someone else to notice that Mom and Dad's struggling middle-class act doesn't match their lifestyle. Emma confirmed what Diana had discovered and added crucial details. Our parents had been hiding wealth for decades, using complex financial instruments and trusts to minimize taxes while maintaining the appearance of modest means. More importantly, Emma had documentation. She'd been quietly investigating the family's finances for a potential exposé article about wealth inequality and had been sitting on explosive evidence. They've been claiming poverty while owning rental properties in 3 states, Emma told me. And Serafina? Melody knows. She's been helping them hide assets for years. She's not a victim in this. She's an accomplice. The betrayal cut deeper knowing that Melody had actively participated in deceiving me for years while positioning herself as the struggling family member who deserved my support. Within 72 hours, I'd assembled what Marcus called a nuclear-level legal response. I had financial forensics experts tracing every hidden asset, communications specialists analyzing years of family emails and text messages, and Emma providing journalistic documentation that would make their deception public record. But the most crucial element of my strategy came from Victoria's advice: don't just defend yourself. Create consequences that ensure they never try this again. I discovered that my parents' rental properties had been operating without proper permits for years, and their tax filings contained discrepancies that would interest the IRS. Melody's participation in hiding assets while claiming financial hardship for family purposes could be construed as fraud in the context of her medical practice's financial statements. I scheduled individual meetings with each family member, starting with my parents. I wanted to give them one chance to withdraw their lawsuit and apologize before I destroyed them completely. The meeting with my parents took place at an upscale restaurant downtown, neutral territory where they'd have to keep their voices down. I arrived early, ordered wine, and waited for them with Diana's complete financial report in my briefcase. Serafina, honey, my mother began as they sat down, we hope you understand that this lawsuit isn't personal. We just think family should share resources more equitably. I smiled pleasantly and slid the financial report across the table. Before we discuss family resources, I think you should know that I'm fully aware of your $4.2 million in hidden assets, your 3 rental properties, and your offshore investment accounts. The color drained from both their faces. My father's hand shook slightly as he reached for his water glass. I also know about Melody's participation in hiding these assets, and I have documentation of your coordinated efforts to deceive me about your financial status for years while planning to sue me for my legally acquired property. My mother opened her mouth to speak, but I continued calmly. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to withdraw your lawsuit immediately and issue a public apology for your attempted fraud. Or I'm going to file criminal charges, expose your financial deception publicly, and ensure that your reputations are destroyed completely. My father found his voice first. You can't prove anything. Those are private financial matters. I smiled again, the expression never reaching my eyes. Dad, I've spent 5 years learning how to destroy business competitors who underestimate me. You've just made the mistake of becoming my competition. That evening, I had similar conversations with Melody and her husband James. By the end of the week, I'd presented each family member with detailed evidence of their deception and clear consequences for continuing their legal attack. But I was just getting started. They'd taught me something valuable about family loyalty. It was conditional, manipulative, and completely one-sided. Now I was going to teach them about real consequences. The family's response to my ultimatum was predictably arrogant. Instead of backing down, they doubled down on their lawsuit and made a critical mistake. They tried to turn our extended family against me. I learned about their smear campaign when my grandmother called me in tears. "Serafina, your parents are telling everyone that you've become cruel and greedy, that you've forgotten your family values. They're saying you threatened them." My grandmother, Elena Vale, had always been my strongest supporter. She'd immigrated from Italy with nothing and built a successful restaurant business through sheer determination. She understood hard work and had always been proud of my entrepreneurial spirit. "Grandma, I need to show you something," I said, driving to her house immediately. I brought simplified versions of the financial documents and explained the situation carefully, watching her expression change from confusion to anger to something much more dangerous, disappointed fury. "They told me they couldn't afford to help with your cousin Maria's college expenses," Elena said slowly, her voice shaking with rage. "I gave them $15,000 from my savings because they said the family needed to support Maria's education." That was the moment I realized my parents' deception went far beyond hiding wealth. They'd been actively stealing from family members by claiming poverty while sitting on millions. Elena made some phone calls that evening. By the next day, I had a list of 6 family members who'd been manipulated into giving my parents money over the past 5 years, believing they were helping struggling relatives. The total exceeded $60,000. Money my millionaire parents had essentially stolen through lies. My cousin Maria, whose college expenses had supposedly been such a burden, was particularly devastating to hear from. "Serafina, they told me you couldn't help with school because you'd said your business money needed to stay in the business. I've felt guilty for years thinking you didn't want to help family." This was their game: triangulation, lies, and emotional manipulation. They'd been playing family members against each other while positioning themselves as the martyred middle, struggling to keep everyone together despite their difficult youngest daughter and their financial limitations. I realized I needed to approach this like the business crisis it had become. I called an emergency meeting with Marcus, Diana, and 2 additional attorneys Marcus recommended, specialists in family fraud and financial crimes. "We're not just dealing with a civil lawsuit anymore," I explained to the legal team. "This is systematic fraud affecting multiple family members over several years. They've stolen money from elderly relatives through false claims of financial hardship." Elena had also provided me with something invaluable: copies of family financial records she'd kept meticulously over the years, including documentation of every loan and gift family members had made to my parents. Her Italian grandmother's attention to financial detail was about to become my parents' nightmare. That week, I also reached out to someone I'd been hesitant to involve, my college friend Sarah Mitchell, who'd become a successful financial crimes investigator for the FBI. Sarah and I had remained close, and she'd always been impressed by my business acumen. "Serafina," Sarah said after reviewing the basic facts, "what your parents are doing crosses into federal territory if they've used any interstate banking or communication to coordinate this fraud. The IRS would also be very interested in their unreported rental income and hidden assets." "I don't want to destroy them," I said carefully. "I want them to stop attacking me and make restitution to the family members they've deceived." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes the threat of federal involvement is enough to create cooperation. Let me make some inquiries about the best way to approach this." Meanwhile, Emma had been conducting her own investigation from the journalism angle. She discovered that my parents had been using their struggling family narrative in their social circles for years, receiving sympathy and financial advantages from their church, community organizations, and even my father's employer, who'd given him several hardship bonuses over the years. "Serafina, They've built their entire social identity around being humble, struggling people who sacrifice for their children, Emma explained during one of our strategy sessions. The exposure of their wealth isn't just financial, it's going to destroy their reputation completely. This gave me an idea for the most elegant revenge possible. Instead of just defending myself legally, I could give them exactly what they'd been asking for: transparency about family finances. I spent the next week creating what I called the Family Financial Transparency Project. Working with financial forensics experts, I had them create a comprehensive report documenting every family member's actual financial status, including all hidden assets, unreported income, and financial assistance received from relatives. The report was thorough, accurate, and completely legal. Everything was public record or voluntarily provided by family members who were tired of the deception. It showed my parents' actual net worth, their hidden properties, their tax avoidance strategies, and most damning, their pattern of accepting money from family members while hiding their own wealth. I also commissioned a second report showing how their behavior had affected each family member financially and emotionally. Maria's story was particularly powerful. She'd worked 3 jobs through college, believing her successful businessman uncles couldn't afford to help her because they were supporting their struggling children. But the piece de resistance came from Elena, who provided documentation of every family gathering where my parents had claimed financial hardship while simultaneously making expensive purchases they'd hidden from the family. Emma had obtained photographs from social media and family events that showed my parents' actual lifestyle versus their claimed poverty. On Friday afternoon, I called my parents and requested a family meeting for Sunday. I want everyone there: you, Melody, James, and Elena. We need to have a complete discussion about family finances and this lawsuit. Serafina, my mother said, her voice tight with stress, we're not backing down. Family means sharing resources with those who have less. Perfect, I replied. That's exactly what we're going to discuss. Sharing resources with those who have less. I spent Saturday preparing presentations that would make their lawsuit look like the fraudulent money grab it was. I had financial charts, legal documentation, and, most importantly, testimony from family members they'd deceived. Victoria helped me practice the presentation. Remember, she advised, you're not the defendant here anymore. You're the prosecutor. They attacked you, but you're exposing them. Stay calm, stay factual, and let the evidence speak. Sunday morning, I arrived at Elena's house early to set up. Elena had insisted on hosting the meeting, and I suspected she wanted home field advantage for what was about to happen. Emma arrived with her recording equipment. With everyone's consent, she'd be documenting the meeting for her article about wealth inequality and family financial fraud. Sarah had provided legal guidance on exactly what questions would create the most pressure without crossing into entrapment. When my parents and Melody arrived, they looked confident but slightly nervous. They'd brought their attorney, which told me they were still planning to pursue their legal action against me. Before we discuss your lawsuit against Serafina, Elena said without preamble, I think we need to discuss some financial transparency in this family. I smiled and opened my laptop. I've prepared some materials that should help everyone understand the real financial situation we're dealing with. The next 3 hours would completely change our family dynamic forever. As I clicked to the first slide of my presentation, I noticed my father's face had already begun to pale. They had no idea what was coming, but they were about to learn that underestimating me had been the biggest mistake of their lives. You know that feeling when you realize someone has been playing chess while you thought you were playing checkers? Well, stick around because this family meeting is about to become a masterclass in strategic revenge. What happens next will shock you just as much as it shocked them. The presentation began with a simple slide, Vail Family Financial Transparency Report, prepared by Certified Financial Forensics Team. I watched my parents exchange worried glances as their attorney leaned forward, suddenly alert. As we discuss family financial obligations, I began smoothly. I think it's important that everyone understands the complete financial picture. The first section detailed my parents' actual net worth. $4.2 million in assets, including 3 rental properties generating $48,000 annually in unreported income, offshore investment accounts, and a trust fund they'd established years earlier. My mother gasped audibly. "How did you? Those are private." "Nothing here is private, Mom. Everything shown is public record or voluntarily provided by family members." I clicked to the next slide showing their tax filings versus their actual income. What is interesting is the pattern of tax avoidance and unreported rental income spanning 7 years. Elena spoke up from her chair. "Robert, you told me you couldn't afford to help with Maria's education. I gave you $15,000 from my retirement savings." The room fell silent except for the gentle whir of Emma's recording equipment. My father's attorney was frantically taking notes. I continued methodically through each piece of evidence. Bank records showing large cash deposits that corresponded with family loans. Documentation of the luxury vacation to Europe they'd taken while claiming they couldn't afford to help with my cousin's medical bills. Property purchases made within weeks of receiving emergency funds from family members. The most fascinating pattern, I said, clicking to a timeline graphic, is how requests for family financial assistance were always made immediately before major personal expenditures. Melody found her voice. "This is ridiculous. Mom and Dad have been financially responsible. Just because they've saved money doesn't mean." "Melody, you've been helping them hide assets for 3 years." I pulled up bank transfer records showing her moving money between accounts to obscure the paper trail. "Your participation in financial fraud while claiming family hardship is particularly interesting given your medical practice's financial statements." Her husband James suddenly looked very pale. As a corporate lawyer, he understood exactly what kind of legal jeopardy they were all facing. Elena stood up slowly, her voice shaking with controlled fury. "You took money from me, from Maria, from your own mother-in-law, while you had millions hidden away. You stole from your own family." "We didn't steal," my father protested weakly. "We borrowed." With no intention of repaying, while lying about your ability to pay, I interrupted. "The legal term is fraud." I clicked to the next section, documentation of every family member they'd deceived. Maria had provided heartbreaking testimony about working 3 jobs through college while believing her family couldn't help. Uncle Tony had mortgaged his house to lend them money for Melody's supposed student loans. Aunt Patricia had cleaned houses on weekends to contribute to what she thought were my parents' medical expenses. $63,000, I announced. "That's how much you've stolen from family members through fraudulent claims of financial hardship." The attorney finally spoke. "Mrs. Vale, I need to advise my clients that this meeting should end immediately. The information being presented could be used to file criminal charges," I finished pleasantly. "Yes, that's exactly right." Emma looked up from her recording equipment. "I should mention that everything discussed here will be included in my article about family financial fraud for the Tribune. The public has a right to know how wealthy individuals exploit family relationships for financial gain." My mother started crying, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of rage at being caught. "Serafina, you're destroying this family. We only wanted what was fair." "What's fair," Elena interrupted sharply, "is returning every penny you stole from family members who trusted you." I clicked to my final slide, resolution options. Option 1. You immediately withdraw your lawsuit, issue public apologies to every family member you've deceived, and begin full restitution payments with interest. You also submit corrected tax filings and pay all penalties voluntarily. Their attorney was frantically whispering to my father. Option 2. I file criminal charges for fraud, theft, and tax evasion. Emma publishes her expose article. The IRS receives detailed reports of your unreported income. Your rental properties are investigated for permit violations and tenant fraud. I paused dramatically. Option 3. You continue your lawsuit against me, and I implement option 2 while also filing countersuits for defamation, harassment, and attempted extortion. The silence stretched for nearly 2 minutes. My parents looked decades older than they had when they'd arrived. Melody was staring at her hands, apparently realizing that her medical license could be at risk if criminal charges were filed. James whispered something to Melody, and she nodded reluctantly. "What exactly are you demanding?" their attorney asked carefully. "Full financial restitution to all family members, with formal apologies. Immediate withdrawal of their lawsuit. A legally binding agreement that they will never again make financial claims against me or any family member based on false hardship representations." Elena added firmly, "and they pay for Maria's remaining college expenses and reimburse everyone who helped them fraudulently." I closed my laptop and looked directly at my parents. "You taught me that family loyalty means sacrifice and support. You just never expected me to apply those lessons to holding you accountable." My mother made one last desperate attempt. "Serafina, we're still your parents." "Doesn't that mean anything? It means I'm giving you the chance to do the right thing voluntarily before I force you to do it legally." The attorney requested a private consultation with his clients. While they huddled in Elena's kitchen, Emma showed me the preliminary draft of her article. The headline read, "When Family Values Meet Financial Fraud." How one couple's lawsuit exposed years of elder abuse and theft. "The story writes itself," Emma said quietly. Wealthy couple sues successful daughter while hiding millions and stealing from elderly relatives. It's going to destroy them socially and financially. When they returned from their consultation, my father's shoulders were slumped in defeat. Their attorney spoke formally. "My clients are prepared to discuss settlement terms that would include withdrawal of their lawsuit against Ms. Vale." Elena smiled grimly. "Smart choice. Because if you'd chosen to continue this fight, you would have learned exactly where Serafina gets her business ruthlessness." As they prepared to leave, my mother made one final attempt at emotional manipulation. "I hope you're satisfied destroying your own family." I looked at her calmly. "I didn't destroy anything. I just stopped letting you destroy everyone else." The formal settlement took 3 weeks to negotiate, but the real consequences began immediately. Within 48 hours of our family meeting, my parents' carefully constructed social facade started crumbling in spectacular fashion. Emma's article hit the Tribune's website Tuesday morning with devastating precision. Local businessman and wife accused of systematic family financial fraud ran alongside photos of their luxury home and rental properties. The story detailed their hidden wealth while accepting money from elderly relatives, their tax evasion strategies, and the lawsuit they'd filed against their successful daughter. The community response was immediate and brutal. My father's employer, a family-owned construction company that prided itself on honest, hard-working values, placed him on administrative leave pending investigation. They'd given him several hardship bonuses over the years based on his claims of financial struggle, and they were furious about being deceived. Their church was equally unforgiving. Pastor Williams called me personally to apologize after learning that the congregation had taken up collections for my family multiple times, believing they were helping struggling parishioners. "We've been providing food assistance and utility help for 2 years," he said, his voice tight with anger. "They've been stealing from people who genuinely needed that help." But the most satisfying consequence came from an unexpected source. The tenants in my parents' rental properties had been organizing complaints about substandard living conditions and excessive rent increases. When Emma's article revealed that their landlords were millionaires claiming poverty, the tenants retained a lawyer specializing in tenant rights violations. Sarah called me Wednesday afternoon with updates from her federal contacts. "The IRS is very interested in your parents' situation. Unreported rental income combined with fraudulent hardship claims creates significant criminal liability. They're looking at potential charges that could include 5 years in federal prison." Meanwhile, the settlement negotiations revealed just how deep their deception went. Marcus discovered they'd been operating their rental properties without proper business licenses, using a complex shell company structure to hide ownership while avoiding taxes. They'd also been accepting government assistance programs for low-income families while hiding their actual wealth. The legal exposure is enormous, Marcus explained during one of our strategy sessions. They're facing potential criminal charges from multiple agencies, civil liability to family members, tenant lawsuits, and professional consequences for both your father's contracting license and Melody's medical practice. Melody's situation was particularly devastating. The state medical board had opened an investigation after learning about her participation in financial fraud. Her participation in hiding assets while claiming family financial hardship raised questions about her character and fitness to practice medicine. James had filed for separation within a week of our family meeting, apparently deciding that his corporate law career couldn't survive association with his wife's criminal activities. The irony wasn't lost on me. Melody, who'd always claimed moral superiority over my mercenary business practices, had destroyed her marriage and career through actual criminal behavior. The community shunning was thorough and merciless. Their country club membership was suspended pending investigation. Their regular bridge group expelled them. Even their grocery store experiences became uncomfortable as news of their fraud spread through their social circles. Elena had become the family matriarch in a way she'd never been before, coordinating restitution efforts and ensuring that every deceived family member received full compensation with interest. She'd also made it clear that my parents were unwelcome at family gatherings until they'd made complete amends. Respect is earned, not inherited, she told them during one particularly tense restitution meeting. You've lost any claim to family leadership through your dishonesty. The financial restitution was painful for them to execute. They'd been forced to liquidate investments and sell one rental property to cover the $78,000 they owed family members, plus interest and penalties. The IRS settlement added another $45,000 in back taxes and penalties. More importantly, they'd been required to provide detailed financial disclosures to every family member, ending their ability to manipulate relatives through false claims of hardship. Elena had insisted on this transparency clause, ensuring they could never again exploit family trust for financial gain. I watched their social collapse with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Part of me had hoped they would choose honesty and redemption when confronted with their behavior. Instead, they'd doubled down on manipulation until legal and social pressure forced compliance. My mother made several attempts to reach out to me during this period, but her communications revealed that she still didn't understand the fundamental problem with their behavior. Her messages focused on how hurt she was by my betrayal and how I'd destroyed the family by exposing their secrets. She never acknowledged that they'd been stealing from elderly relatives. She never showed remorse for the financial hardship they'd caused family members who'd sacrificed to help them. Her entire focus remained on how their exposure had embarrassed them socially. Diana provided weekly updates on their adjustment to their new reality. My father had aged visibly, the stress of public exposure and financial consequences taking a clear physical toll. My mother had become increasingly isolated as their former social connections distanced themselves from the scandal. Melody's situation continued deteriorating. The medical board investigation had expanded after other complaints surfaced about her financial dealings with colleagues. Apparently, she'd been using similar manipulation tactics in her professional life, claiming financial hardship while living beyond her declared means. The most poetic justice came when their former tenants filed a class action lawsuit alleging rent fraud and habitability violations. The same rental income they'd hidden from the IRS and family had been extracted from tenants living in substandard conditions. Their victims were organizing against them from multiple directions. 3 weeks after the settlement, I received a formal letter from their attorney confirming complete withdrawal of their lawsuit and acknowledging that they had no legitimate claims against Ms. Vale's property or business assets. The letter included formal apologies to each family member they'd deceived, though the language was clearly drafted by their lawyer rather than coming from genuine remorse. Elena framed her apology letter and hung it in her kitchen, telling visitors it served as a reminder that family loyalty works both ways and honesty is not optional. By the end of the month, my parents had essentially become pariahs in their own community. Their carefully constructed image as humble, struggling family people had been completely destroyed by evidence of their greed and deception. I realized that my victory was complete, but it felt different than I'd expected. I'd successfully defended myself and protected other family members from future exploitation, but watching people destroy themselves through their own dishonesty was more sobering than satisfying. The question remaining was whether this experience would teach them to change their behavior, or whether they'd simply become more careful about hiding their deception in the future. 6 months after the settlement, I stood on my villa's terrace watching the sunset paint the Pacific in shades of gold and crimson. The legal battle was over, but the real transformation had been in understanding what family actually means. Elena had become more than just my grandmother. She'd emerged as the moral center of our family, establishing new traditions based on honesty and mutual support rather than manipulation and secrecy. Every Sunday, she hosted dinners for what she called the honest branch of the family tree. Maria, Emma, our cousins who'd been deceived, and I gathered to share meals and rebuild relationships based on truth rather than pretense. Maria had graduated summa cum laude and was starting her master's program fully funded, her financial stress finally eliminated. She'd written me a letter that I kept framed in my office. "You didn't just expose the truth about Mom and Dad, you showed me what real family support looks like when it's genuine instead of manipulative." Emma's investigative article had won a regional journalism award and led to a series about financial elder abuse that was creating real policy changes. Her career had flourished, and our relationship had grown into something like true sisterhood. She understood the cost of standing up for truth when it meant opposing family members who preferred comfortable lies. The business consequences for my parents had been severe and permanent. My father lost his contracting license after the investigation revealed years of permit violations and tax fraud related to his business operations. My mother's social isolation had become complete. Their former friends and community members couldn't reconcile the humble, struggling persona they'd projected with the evidence of hidden wealth and family exploitation. Most remarkably, several of their former victims had thrived after being freed from the obligation to support people who didn't actually need help. Uncle Tony had paid off his mortgage early with money he'd previously been sending to my parents. Aunt Patricia had started a small business with savings she'd stopped giving away based on fraudulent hardship claims. Melody's career had effectively ended. The medical board investigation had resulted in a suspended license, and the revelation of her financial deception had destroyed her credibility with colleagues and patients. James had finalized their divorce, and she'd been forced to move back in with our parents. A bitter irony considering they'd started this entire conflict claiming she deserved more financial support. The rental property lawsuit had resulted in a settlement that essentially eliminated my parents' rental income for the next 5 years, as they were required to make extensive property improvements and provide rent reductions to compensate tenants for years of substandard living conditions while paying excessive rent to millionaire landlords pretending to be struggling. Most satisfying was the change in family dynamics. The relatives who'd initially criticized me for being too harsh with my parents had gradually come to understand the scope of their deception. When Uncle Tony learned that his house payment difficulties had been unnecessary because the family members he'd been supporting were actually wealthier than he was, his anger was spectacular and justified. I'd also discovered something unexpected about myself during this process. The skills that had built my business empire, strategic thinking, thorough preparation, and calm execution under pressure, were equally effective at defending against family manipulation. I'd spent years feeling guilty about my success while family members struggled, never realizing that their struggles were largely manufactured to exploit my empathy. Victoria had been right about the importance of consequences. People who exploit family relationships only stop when the cost becomes higher than the benefit, she'd observed. My parents had learned that lesson definitively, though they'd never acknowledged their behavior was wrong, only that getting caught had been expensive and embarrassing. The legal victories had been complete, but the emotional growth had been more valuable. I'd learned to distinguish between genuine family loyalty and manipulative obligation. Real family support flows naturally between people who care about each other, rather than being extracted through guilt and deception. Diana's final report had revealed that my parents' manipulation extended beyond financial exploitation. They'd been triangulating family members for years, sharing selective information to create conflicts and maintain their position as the reasonable center of family disputes. Understanding their communication patterns had helped me recognize similar dynamics in business relationships and romantic partnerships. My villa had become a gathering place for chosen family, people who'd earned their place in my life through honesty and genuine care rather than biological accident. Sarah visited regularly, and we developed a business consulting relationship that leveraged her investigative expertise for corporate due diligence. Emma brought her journalism colleagues for weekend retreats that often resulted in important professional collaborations. Most importantly, I'd stopped feeling guilty about my success. The money I'd earned through honest work belonged to me, and I had no obligation to share it with people who'd hidden their own wealth while stealing from vulnerable family members. Understanding this had freed me to be genuinely generous with people who deserved support rather than resentfully compliant with those who demanded it. 6 months later, my parents had made no effort to rebuild relationships with family members they'd deceived. Their apologies had been legal requirements rather than genuine expressions of remorse, and they'd shown no understanding of why their behavior had been harmful beyond the consequences they'd faced for being caught. Elena summed up the situation perfectly during one of our Sunday dinners. Some people think family means you accept whatever treatment they give you because you share blood. Real family means you care enough about each other to be honest, even when honesty is difficult. The financial cost to my parents had exceeded $200,000 in restitution, legal fees, tax penalties, and lost income. More importantly, they'd lost their social standing, professional credibility, and relationships with family members who genuinely cared about them. But they'd taught me something valuable about my own strength and judgment. I'd built a successful business by trusting my instincts about people and situations. When those same instincts warned me about family manipulation, I'd been right to investigate and defend myself rather than accepting their version of family obligation. Looking back, I realized that their lawsuit had been the best thing that could have happened to me. It had forced me to uncover the truth about their character and protect not just myself, but other family members from ongoing exploitation. Sometimes the people who challenge you most directly end up teaching you the most about your own capabilities. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who used guilt and manipulation to control you? Sometimes the people closest to us can be the ones who exploit our loyalty the most. Family karma has a way of coming full circle, and justice might take time, but it usually finds its way to the surface. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear about your own experiences with family dynamics and setting boundaries. Drop a comment below sharing your thoughts. Have you ever had to choose between keeping peace and protecting yourself? Hit that like button if you believe family loyalty should be earned through honesty, not demanded through manipulation. Subscribe for more stories about real people standing up for themselves and finding their chosen family. Share this with anyone who needs to hear that it's okay to set boundaries with family members who don't respect them. Thank you for joining me on this journey of family justice and personal growth. Remember, the best revenge is living authentically and surrounding yourself with people who value honesty over convenience. Until next time, keep building your own definition of family, one based on genuine love and mutual respect.